Queen Soraya married the Shah of Iran when she was only 17 years old. He was 39. The fairy tale lasted 7 years before everything fell apart. In 1958, she was divorced on live television because she could not give him a son. But that was not the whole story. What happened inside the palace walls was much darker. Secret affairs, a violent fight with the Shah's sister, and a suicide attempt that was kept hidden from the world. And when she died alone in Paris in 2001, the autopsy was kept secret. Today, we are uncovering the secrets Iran never wanted you to know. Soraya was born on June 22, 1932, in the English Missionary Hospital in Isfahan. She was a tiny baby born right in the middle of a storm she could not see yet. The way her parents met already felt like something from a strange story. In 1924 in Berlin, Khalil was a 21-year-old political science student who joked that he was chasing beautiful blonde women. That was when he met Eva. After a year of dating, they married on June 22, 1926, the same date that would later be Soraya's birthday. Eva converted to Islam for him, but that did not mean her heart accepted Persian customs. Behind closed doors, the marriage was loud and painful. She argued with Khalil over his tribal pride and nomadic traditions, while she held on to her own European dream. Even as a child, Soraya heard the sound of slammed doors and harsh words, and those early fights left marks she carried quietly. When Soraya was about 8 months old, the family fled. Reza Shah's purges in the early 1930s made Bakhtiari nobles targets. Her parents took a ship from the northern port of Enzeli to Baku, then a train to Berlin. In the eyes of the Iranian government, they were now suspicious. Reza Shah jailed Bakhtiari Khans, took away their oil shares in the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and sent some into forced labor. Those shares were worth millions, and the loss hurt old tribal fortunes badly. By 1936, Nazi records in Berlin listed Khalil as a simple farmer, not a diplomat, a quiet sign that his status and money had been reduced. Reza admired Hitler from afar and ignored the old German agents who had once been protected by the Bakhtiaris. But at home, he crushed their power after the tribal crackdowns of the mid-1930s, forcing them to give up their weapons and jailing or executing some of their leaders. The pressure on the Bakhtiaris was not only emotional, it was shown in cold numbers. Reza Shah, crowned in 1925, used a 1931 tribal uprising as his excuse to arrest around 40 Bakhtiari Khans by 1934. 12 of them were sentenced to death, even if some sentences were softened later, and he seized about 6% of Anglo-Iranian Oil Company shares, which brought in around £500,000 each year. Khalil lost his consul post, and as Nazi Germany tightened its grip, the family's access to Iranian funds was cut roughly in half by 1936, when Hitler began drafting more foreigners and Iran's money abroad was frozen. Khalil saw no future for them in Europe. By 1937, he brought the family back to Iran into a different kind of danger, one where police in Isfahan quietly watched every move the Bakhtiaris made. Back home, Khalil tried to rebuild in small ways. He planted orchards, dug ponds, and tried to create some kind of steady life. But the political situation stayed harsh. Reza Shah was still imprisoning rivals and centralizing power, and Khalil was more or less broke. Soraya, around 5 years old, moved between houses while rumors of her parents' split grew louder. His affairs with local women and Eva's deep resentment turned into open breakdowns. Soraya moved back and forth between Isfahan and Tehran, never fully settled, watching her mother cry over lost dreams in elegant but lonely villas. At the same time, events in the wider world were closing in. Allied powers pressed Iran about its ties with Germany. The German school she had attended was taken over and shut down in June 1941 when the Allies forced the expulsion of hundreds of Germans. When Reza Shah finally fell on September 16, 1941, after the Anglo-Soviet invasion, his pro-German ties and the presence of about 1,000 German agents in Iran were used to justify his abdication. The political pressure lifted a little, but inside Soraya, the fear and uncertainty remained. Her childhood was always split in two. There were the frightening parts, like hearing her mother rant about a savage Persia when anger boiled over, and there were the softer parts, like the way she calmed animals. She had loved visiting the Berlin Zoo as a toddler and learned to handle dogs at just 3 years old, even when her grandfather, Franz Karl, disapproved. Back in Iran, she kept a fox terrier and canaries, tiny signs of the affection she carried for animals in a family that still hunted game for sport. She saw the sharp contrast between her own privileged surroundings, like the house Khalil built with fireplaces and rare hot water, and the harsh lives in the alleys around them. This mix of privilege and pain shaped the eyes people would later call extraordinary, a blend of blue and green that seemed to hold two worlds at once. In the middle of all this, war pushed the family to move again. During the Second World War in 1941, 9-year-old Soraya and her family left Iran and went into exile in Switzerland. There she faced a different kind of pressure. At a strict Swiss boarding school in Geneva, she was told to hide her Muslim background and pass as a Catholic girl. She learned to bow her head in the right chapel and say the right prayers, even while feeling that pieces of herself were being quietly erased. At the same time, her parents' marriage finally broke beyond repair. In 1942, her father, now working again as an Iranian diplomat, officially divorced Eva. He stayed in Zurich. Soraya lived in a small, cramped apartment in Lausanne with her mother. Eva tried to go back to the things she once loved, acting, and looked for roles again in Europe. But nothing worked. Auditions led nowhere. Money never came regularly, and pride slowly gave way to desperation. The two of them survived on small payments that Khalil sent from Tehran. Those payments arrived late, or did not arrive at all, and every delay became another argument. Poverty pressed in on them not only as empty cupboards, but as a feeling of being abandoned. By 1944, at 12 years old, Soraya was back in Iran again and enrolled at the Italian school in Tehran. On paper, it sounded like the life of a polished diplomat's daughter. In reality, it reminded her with every school day that she did not fully belong anywhere. She stood out in the classroom for her talent in art and for her delicate beauty. Her light skin, green eyes, and foreign manners drew stares. Some classmates admired her, but many mocked her as half-European. The nickname hurt. It told her that in their eyes she was neither fully Persian nor fully European, stuck between two worlds without a firm home. The blows did not stop there. In 1945, her father remarried a much younger woman. For Soraya, this felt like a final betrayal, not just a new marriage. At a family dinner, she finally exploded. In front of relatives, she shouted at him, confronting him openly for the first time and showing the temper and courage that would later clash with royal expectations. The obedient boarding school girl was gone. In her place stood a young woman who would not stay silent, even at her own table. Money worries still ruled their everyday life. By 1947, when Soraya was only 15, her mother pushed her into modeling at fashion shows in Tehran. It was not just glamour, it was survival. Eva needed her daughter to help support the household. Soraya stepped into bright rooms filled with wealthy men and women, photographers, and whispers. She became a public figure long before she became a queen. The attention brought admirers, including a young pilot with whom she had a short romance that ended in heartbreak. The early taste of love, followed by loss, added one more layer to the guarded expression she would carry in later photographs. Her path changed again in 1948. At 16, Soraya was sent to Marymount International in London, a finishing school for the daughters of the elite. Officially, it was about refining her manners, teaching her languages, and preparing her for a modern role in high society. Her days were filled with etiquette lessons, literature, writing practice, and private language tutoring. She learned to move easily between English and French. She competed in writing and learned how to host a proper salon and hold a room with elegance. But the letters she wrote back home hinted at another life behind the polished walls. She slipped into secret parties with young British aristocrats, enjoyed forbidden flirtations, and tested the limits placed on her as a girl from a conservative Iranian family. These affairs were not splashed across newspapers, but the stories traveled back through gossip and family networks and quietly shocked her relatives who still expected her to be the perfect daughter. By the summer of 1950, she was moving between London and Lausanne, staying near relatives and improving her languages further. Her fluency in both French and English became one of her trademarks. It made her stand out in European high society and later at court. Her education was never just about classroom work. It was a mixture of old discipline and new freedom, tradition and experiment. And it quietly prepared her for a future in front of the world. That future began to take shape back in Tehran. In 194 Ni, she returned to Iran, and her half-Bakhtiari cousin drew her into the city's influential salons. These were private gatherings where politicians, diplomats, wealthy families, and intellectuals met to talk about art, politics, and the future of the country. In those crowded rooms, Soraya's emerald eyes and height, about 5'7", made her impossible to miss. At one of these gatherings, during an informal photo session, Princess Ashraf Pahlavi, the powerful twin sister of the Shah, noticed her. Ashraf had a sharp eye for women who could fit the role of consort. Soraya's combination of Western style and Persian blood interested her. Soraya learned how to move through these spaces, switching easily between languages and manners, and her ability to exist naturally in both Western and Persian circles began to set her apart. Around the same time, she briefly enrolled at Razi College for Women, another modern school in Tehran known for its progressive classes. She studied literature there, and for a moment her life looked like that of any educated young woman from a privileged background. But this period did not last. Princess Ashraf had already begun to interfere, and soon Soraya's personal choices were no longer fully her own. Ashraf arranged a carefully planned meeting between Soraya and the recently divorced Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi during one of his trips to Paris. He was about 39 years old, had already divorced Princess Fawzia of Egypt, and was looking for a new queen who could represent a modern Iran. Soraya was just 17. The meeting in Paris was not a casual one. Every detail had been planned in advance. Soraya arrived as the youngest woman he would seriously consider. Her European education, Bakhtiari blood, and striking looks were all part of the presentation. The Shah was captivated quickly. Their engagement followed soon after. He gave her a diamond engagement ring, weighing 22.37 carats, a stone now worth over $1 million in today's money. With that ring, her time at Razi College ended. Whatever ordinary path she might have imagined was gone, replaced by a royal life she had not chosen. Before she ever wore a crown, Soraya's name was already in every gossip magazine in Europe. Her mother had leaked her photos to tabloids, hoping that some royal suitor would notice. It worked, but not in the way she imagined. The papers turned the young woman into a scandal. They wrote about parties, whispered about secret lovers, painted her as wild and unfit for a queen. For a while, it looked like Soraya's future had been ruined before it began. But Princess Ashraf, the Shah's powerful sister, stepped in. She took control of the story and remade Soraya as something new, something the nation could love. She became the pure modern face of Iran's future, refined but loyal to her Persian roots. The rumors faded, but the lesson stayed. Every royal dream came with a shadow. By the end of 1949, Soraya's transformation began in full view. Under Ashraf's watchful eye, she was remade to look every bit the modern queen. Her hair was styled perfectly, her clothes chosen to make her shine. Those green eyes became her strength, polished by stylists who knew how to turn charm into power. The makeover wasn't just about beauty. It was a message to the world that Iran's queen would stand shoulder to shoulder with European royalty. Whispers followed her, though. Some said Ashraf had planned it all for political gain. But Soraya was changing fast. From student to icon, from girl to queen-in-waiting. Then came the meeting that would change everything. On September 20th, 1950, in London, Soraya met the Shah. He was smitten almost instantly and proposed within hours. He offered her a diamond ring worth $100,000, the size of a marble, shining in his hand like a promise. The engagement was announced on October 11th, but trouble came in quickly. The Shah's mother called Soraya's mixed Persian-German background impure. Worried it would hurt the monarchy, the young couple ignored it, lost in letters that carried both longing and fear. He wrote of loneliness since his divorce from Princess Fawzia, while she admitted her dread of palace politics. But by November, the press found out about it. Headlines exploded across Europe, forcing them to rush their public announcement. Soraya said later that the attention made her feel exposed, like the world was already looking into her private life. Just when the wedding seemed close, fate turned cruel. Days before the ceremony in December 1950, Soraya fell ill with typhoid fever. The palace went quiet. Doctors feared the worst. The Shah visited her every day in her Swiss hospital, bringing jewels and flowers, refusing to leave her side. It was romantic, but it also showed his worry, because if she survived, no one knew if she could have children. The wedding was postponed to February 12, 1951, and whispers about her health grew louder. When the big day arrived, the world watched. Golestan Palace sparkled with 1,000 lights, and the air smelled of imported tulips. Soraya's gown weighed over 40 pounds, its silver fabric stitched with 6,000 diamonds and 20,000 marabou feathers. She could barely walk down the aisle until attendants cut away layers of fabric. Behind the scenes, jealousy was brewing. The Shah's sisters had messed with her makeup, making her look pale and foreign in the photos. Still, she shone. Cameras flashed, guests gasped, and the world crowned its new queen. But the sabotage was a warning. The palace was not her friend. Their honeymoon by the Caspian Sea began like a fairy tale and ended in heartbreak. Soraya discovered the Shah's mistresses had joined the trip. Furious, she confronted him and gave an ultimatum. End the affairs, or she would leave. But Shah promised to stop, but trust had been broken. Beneath the silk and jewels, their marriage was already shaking. After the wedding, Soraya stepped into her role with purpose. She wasn't happy to just sit still. She took charge of the Imperial Women's Organization and threw herself into literacy campaigns. In 1951, more than 90% of women in rural Iran could not read. Soraya went to them herself, visiting 50 villages that year. She taught, she listened, she handed out thousands of small ABC booklets smuggled past censors. Clerics called her a Western puppet. They threw stones at her convoy in Qom that March, shouting curses, but she never turned back. By the next year, she had helped 8,000 women learn to read. Her courage came at a price. Palace whispers grew cruel. The Shah's sisters froze her out, mocking her foreign ways. In February 1952, they even left her out of a family portrait, calling her a half-breed intruder. Soraya locked herself in her chambers for 2 days, refusing food until the Shah broke the door himself. Her strength showed again in May 1952 when she hosted Queen Juliana of the Netherlands. It was her first major state duty, and she spoke fluent Dutch at the banquet, sealing $2.5 billion in trade deals. Yet, behind the sparkle, she was breaking inside. The Shah's sisters refused to attend the event, hiding in another wing of the palace. That night, Soraya collapsed in tears, gasping for air, until her maid injected a sedative. Still, she returned the next morning to finish the ceremony, smiling for cameras, while diplomats praised her grace. By the time the royal visit ended, trade between Iran and the Netherlands had risen 22%. But Soraya had lost 7 pounds and nearly her peace of mind. Then came the earthquake of 1953. A 6.7 magnitude disaster destroyed villages in Kurdistan, killing over 1,000. Soraya didn't hesitate. She flew to the area herself, wrapped in furs, hauling crates of medicine and blankets. She worked beside doctors handing out food, even smuggling banned antibiotics past clerics who called them unholy. For days, she barely slept, holding sick children until sunrise. Her convoy saved hundreds of lives, and when she returned to Tehran, she was hailed as a national hero. The Shah praised her in public, something he rarely did. By 1954, Soraya's influence reached beyond politics. At the Tehran Fair that October, she stepped out wearing a new kind of royal fashion. Isfahan's blended with Dior's modern lines. The crowd cheered. Her style boosted silk exports overnight, but the joy didn't last. Conservative clerics called her a sinner for showing her arms, and mobs gathered outside the palace, throwing stones and tomatoes. She ignored them, speaking calmly on stage as guards pulled attackers away. By year's end, her designs had put Iran's fabrics on the world map. In 1955, she founded the Soraya Foundation for Orphans, building schools across Tehran and Kurdistan. She funded clinics, dormitories, and feeding programs with her own money. Secretly, she even adopted a Korean orphan named Reza, disguising him as a nephew because royal law forbade non-blood heirs. She paid for his care, visited him in secret, and never told the world. The foundation's work lowered orphan mortality by nearly 35% and educated thousands of children. But it deepened her divide with the royal family, who accused her of breaking sacred tradition. Her defiance grew stronger in 1956 when she launched the Women for Iran Drive. She pushed Parliament to raise female university enrollment from 10 to 25%. Clerics called her dangerous. Death threats poured in. Yet, she didn't stop. Within 3 years, female graduates had doubled, and a generation of women found hope because one queen refused to bow. The next year, she turned her attention to disease. Soraya funded anti-malaria clinics across 12 provinces, vaccinating over 100,000 children. She even uncovered corruption within her own health network and exposed it, leading to arrests. Her hands-on courage reduced infection rates by more than half and earned her quiet respect among workers who called her the Queen who listens. Queen Soraya arrived in America in 1955, her presence radiating grace beside Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The world watched as they dined with President Eisenhower and First Lady at the White House, where Soraya's calm voice and fluent English left a lasting mark. She lunched with senators, spoke of women's rights, and charmed reporters who couldn't stop writing about her composure. But behind the beauty, she was smart. She secured $5 million in U.S. aid for Iran simply through conversation and conviction. When the CIA tried to approach her for inside information, she smiled and declined, saying Iran's secrets were not for sale. That moment defined her, showing the world that beneath the diamonds and silk, she carried steel in her heart. The following year, she swept through Europe, greeted by applause in London and Rome. Cameras loved her, and even beside Queen Elizabeth II, Soraya's glow seemed to outshine the British monarch. Her wardrobe dazzled, her charm effortless, yet her rise stirred jealousy within her own royal circle. At the Quirinal Palace in Rome, whispers began. Rumors planted by the Shah's own sisters claiming she was too close to her hosts. Newspapers feasted on the gossip, but Soraya remained calm, appearing at charity events and receptions with her familiar poised smile. She had already learned that being queen meant walking through storms with elegance, no matter how sharp the rain felt. By 1957, she had become Iran's ambassador to UNESCO and stood before an audience in Paris, speaking about art, history, and the duty of nations to protect beauty from war. Her words earned standing ovations, but what few knew was that she was quietly smuggling out paintings by Iranian dissident artists, giving them a voice that her homeland had silenced. Her actions risked everything, angering the conservative elite. Yet, they revealed her as more than a queen. She was a protector of truth and freedom. When she traveled to India in 1958 with Prime Minister Nehru, her presence drew crowds and admiration. She gave Persian rugs as symbols of friendship and promoted unity between their nations. But during the trip, her body began to betray her. Early signs of infertility appeared, forcing her to cancel appearances. Rumors swirled through the Indian press about her ability to have a child. Despite the pain, she carried on until her strength faded. The whispers followed her home, louder than ever, shadowing her every step. That same year, she helped host the Baghdad Pact summit in Tehran. The world's eyes were on Iran, and Soraya handled each guest with tact. But even in her own palace, she was not safe. A spy planted by the Shah's mother had been watching her every move. When Soraya discovered the betrayal, she confronted the relative herself, cutting through deceit with quiet fury. It deepened the rift within the royal family and reminded her that even a queen could not trust her own blood. The tensions in the palace had been growing for years. The Shah's mother despised her, keeping her away from the family jewels as a deliberate insult, stripping her of royal symbols that defined her legitimacy. Soraya responded in her own way. She began hosting secret salons filled with diplomats and thinkers, where conversations flowed and alliances formed. It was her world now, her own circle of influence built from charm, intellect, and defiance. Those evenings became quiet rebellions against the family that sought to erase her. But there were other wounds that ran deeper. In 1955, during a medical trip to Europe, she grew close to a Swiss doctor. The friendship turned to something more, and guilt drove her to confess to the Shah. His response stunned the court. Instead of anger, he offered forgiveness and gifted her a Paris villa. Yet, it was not love alone that moved him. It was calculation. He increased surveillance around her, making sure she was never out of his reach. His forgiveness was a chain wrapped in silk. A year later, everything exploded. The Shah's sisters, led by Princess Ashraf, demanded Soraya's removal, blaming her for failing to produce an heir. During one heated confrontation, Soraya's patience broke. She slapped Ashraf across the face, a single slap that echoed through the palace halls. It was an act of defiance that few royal women had ever dared. It nearly cost her the crown, and only the Shah's intervention kept her on the throne. But something shifted that day. The bond between Soraya and the royal family shattered beyond repair. Yet even before the marriage began to crumble, Soraya had proven her loyalty. During the Mossadegh crisis in 1953, when the Shah's life was in danger, she hid him in her quarters, destroyed documents that could have damned him, and risked her own safety for his. Those moments of devotion were forgotten by the same people who would later call her barren and blame her for fate's cruelty. By 1958, desperation filled the palace. The Shah turned to rituals, demanding that Soraya submit to fertility charms, talismans, and endless ceremonies meant to bless her womb. She endured them all, though they humiliated her. The Shah's growing reliance on mistresses only deepened her hurt. What had begun as a love story had turned into a slow public unraveling. The search for a cure became an obsession. In 1954, the Shah flew her to America on a private jet for the best medical care. Doctors in New York called her infertility a result of stress, not defect, giving her false hope. But a later surgery in Boston shattered it. The diagnosis was final. Her body would never bear a child. Grief swallowed her whole. In June 1955, she tried to end her life by swallowing over 50 sleeping pills. Servants found her barely breathing, and the palace buried the scandal in silence. The scars from that night stayed with her forever. The years that followed were a blur of hospitals and injections. Between 1956 and 1957, Swiss doctors filled her with hormones, charging the royal treasury millions. Her body swelled, her hair fell out, her spirit dimmed. By the time the truth came out that many of those treatments were scams, her body was wrecked beyond repair. She called it medical rape for greed. The Shah's visits became fewer, the distance colder. The woman who had once represented Iran's pride now felt like its broken promise. Late in 1957, the Shah offered her a choice. He would take another wife to produce an heir, but let her remain queen. She refused. She offered adoption instead, pleading to raise a boy as their son. But the idea was rejected by the court for fear of tainting the royal bloodline. The humiliation was unbearable. When false rumors later spread that she was pregnant, they only deepened her suffering. The lies were planned to buy time before the inevitable divorce, and when it finally came on April 6, 1958, the Shah cried on national television, saying it was his duty to his people. Soraya stayed silent, her heart already gone. Her statement called it a sacrifice for her nation. The Shah made sure she was cared for, giving her a Paris penthouse, $7,000 a month, and a secret trust fund worth $1 million to keep her from ever speaking of what she had seen inside the palace. The woman once called the saddest princess now had everything money could buy, except peace. In 1965, she tried to start anew. Michelangelo Antonioni cast her in the film The Travolti, where she played a version of herself. She earned $50,000, but the movie failed, and whispers of an affair with her co-star Alberto Sordi filled the tabloids. Her contract even forbade her from smiling in public, feeding the image of tragedy the world refused to let her escape. The scandal ended her acting hopes before they began. Years later, she found love again too. In the late 1960s, she met Italian director Franco Indovina. Their bond was real, quiet, and full of warmth she had missed for years. But fate was merciless. In 1972, his plane crashed into Mount Longa, killing all 115 aboard. Soraya never recovered. She withdrew from public life, her days folding into silence. In 1991, she released her memoir, Palace Walk Alone. Finally telling the story in her own words, she spoke of loyalty, humiliation, and the emptiness of a crown. By the time the Iranian Revolution toppled the Pahlavi dynasty in 1979, all her sacrifices had turned to dust. Everything she had endured to preserve a kingdom no longer existed. In 1980, she wrote to the Shah one last time asking to see him as he lay dying in exile, but he passed before her letter reached him. 21 years later, on October 25, 2001, Soraya died alone in Paris at 69. The official cause was listed as natural, but the sealed autopsy whispered of a brain hemorrhage. Her body was found surrounded by photographs of her younger self, smiling, vibrant, untouched by betrayal. The same world that once watched her sparkle now barely noticed her passing. Her story ended quietly, wrapped in mystery, as if the universe had chosen to let her final secrets rest, where no one could reach them.